Uh, Good day, everyone. Welcome to the weekly API meeting discussion. We got a short agenda today. One of the topics we want to discuss is the storage multipath support, which is PR 297. I did get a message from Ben that he's not going to be able to attend today, but he said to go ahead and discuss this and gather any questions and feedback so he can respond on Slack. So I want to go ahead and get things started with this particular PR. Boris, did you have any questions or things related to this PR that you wanted to bring up?
Vipin, you up to just an open discussion a little bit on the objects and the relationships here?
Yeah, I did ask questions. I believe Ben clarified some of those things. So overall, I have to try it out. That's what I was thinking, and then maybe provide a bit more feedback. At a high level, it seems okay to me. But I think the real thing will come out when I play with it in our environment. So I'm sure we can make changes to it if we discover something, but for now it looks okay. The way I saw it is that namespace, of course, refers to a controller, and the way Ben was imagining was that NVMe controller, NVMe path is really a representation of a remote controller, and there could be multiple paths to which a controller could be exposed. So so that is the NVMe controller object, and then there's NVMe path object, which is representing the backend, and then so that's why NVMe path has reference to NVMe controller object, and then namespace, of course, is representing the volume at the backend, and that needs to also associate itself to a controller. So that's how I understood it. Looked okay. I LGTM the PR, but I definitely think that I have to actually implement it to know if anything is missing, and I'm hoping that we could make amendments once things are up and running. So it's important for this PR to go in, so so that we could go ahead with that.
Yeah, so I understand the new object, the NVMe path. Obviously, this is represented in transport itself. I think we can do a little bit of better job in documentation here of the different fields and explanation, like what is the difference between things. The reference from the NVMe path to the controller, I think that's fine. Again, we'll do the cleanup with the resource IDs and full names a little bit later, so that's also fine. The namespace is a little tricky because on one side, namespace represent the remote volume, and then in the middle end and the front end, you actually reference that NVMe remote namespace object and can build your rack and stack of different block devices on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
But my question is how that remote namespace object is correlating with the existing backend APIs, for example, that we have for file, AIO, and debug null devices. It seems to me that either we need to abandon those other objects and always use this namespace object, because today it's very unclear how you do the rack and stack with this object versus the local PCI Express or local file or AIO, Linux AIO log devices. That is still very unclear to me. I think there is a lot of work to be done in this space for consolidating this remote namespace into the other backend devices that we already have as an object. I think we did a very poor job on the backend side.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Boris. In fact, in the initial implementation, I wasn't thinking of using this particular object, which is the namespace NVMF remote namespace object at all. I think because NQN is specified in the controller, and that should be sufficient for me to connect to a backend.
I understand why Ben did it, so I can try to explain and then we can brainstorm on this. So even in Linux kernel or SPDK implementation, right? When you do the connect operation and you connect into the remote subsystem, if it's provisioned with let's say 5 namespaces, those namespaces immediately pop up in your either SPDK or Linux kernel stack. But the operation that led to this is basically the RPC of create remote controller. So when we created the remote controller, we passed, before the change, right? We passed all the transport information, the NQN and everything. And the result of operation, we cannot return more than one object according to Google AIP and the protobuf definition. So what we return to the user is basically the remote controller object. But as a result of this remote controller object, a lot of block devices were created after the connect operation was successful. So there is no way for us to actually represent those automatically created objects when the connect operation succeeded. I think this is an attempt, and maybe even, we need to split it into 2 pull requests because they're probably not very related. But I think that was an attempt to solve that problem, how we represent the automatically created. And this is why Ben only suggested the least remote namespace, the only RPC, and we don't have create, delete, update, and get RPCs.
Yeah. Like I said, I didn't see any use case for doing a create or anything like that on the backend object on namespace for sure.
So when you do, for example, in your implementation, when you do the connect to the remote subsystem, and remote subsystem has a lot of namespaces, how you represent that to the user? Like in the objects, in the protobufs. You create those objects by yourself? It's not user requested objects?
Yeah, I mean, not on the initiator. So if you are configuring this on initiator, then yeah, it is not queryable on the initiator. So on the back end, certainly you would need something equivalent of a namespace to list that.
Yeah. No, this is on initiator.
Yeah, no, I understand. I'm just saying that we don't.
And another question that I had, we don't have to solve it right now in this pull request. We can have it in addition, but recently I contributed the TLS to SPDK. So, and you obviously, if I remember correctly, have also a TLS session for NVMe implemented, right? So the question is where the PSK key and identity come in this model. Do they belong to the path or they belong to controller? This is another thing I wanted to ask Ben offline. Do you have an idea, or we can just...
I mean, there are, this is not the only thing. Path may have other associated parameters as well, from what I see. And maybe worth a discussion. This may be a base or a start, but we need to evolve it. Path may have more attributes like keep alives and or timeouts and other things that is not really belonging to a controller. Now, I don't think that makes sense to have encryption on one path to a backend, but not to the other path. So I don't know if encryption as such belongs to a path object because it is.
Oh, you can definitely connect. You can have a subsystem exposing and listening on 2 different TCP ports, for example.
Correct.
And then one is having
you
a session
could.
and another doesn't.
You could. I'm not denying it's not actually possible for us. What I'm saying is that, the use case wise, it won't make sense that if you're trying to secure, a path is, and they would have different keys. All paths could have different keys technically. I mean, there's difference between could have and what makes most logical sense for someone to expose this. So whoever is providing key is the entity that is responsible for securing a given volume, and regardless of the path it is taking, that entity is same. So do we really need multiple keys for different paths, even though we could have it?
But if you have 2 storage systems, and one supports TLS and the second one doesn't support TLS. So the path is the only object that knows, or you create two controllers in that.
Correct. Yeah, that's the way I was thinking. You would create two different controllers, and because there are two different systems.
Subsystems.
Yeah.
But the subsystem, I think that Ben pushed the subsystem NQN inside the path instead of the controller. So if your vision that to every target NQN, we need to create a new remote controller, then we probably need to push the sub NQN into the controller and not into the path.
Correct. And that's why I think, if you read the response to my comments, whatever Ben put response to my comments in the PR, he basically said that he's not thinking path as a pure path. He's really thinking this as a remote representation of a controller. Like if you can scroll up and not look at the comments.
I saw his response.
Yeah. So
I
I mean,
think
that's
that
the way
remote-
he's seeing it. Yeah.
He thinks remote controller is an aggregator of the path, and the path
Correct.
is the actual controller itself.
Correct. So in that case, yeah, path is not a path anymore. Now the only gotcha here is that if you specify the remote, NQN here, or rather, if you specify the NQN here,
Yes.
then you have to really represent that backend entity. In which case,
Mhm.
you are mixing maybe some of the transport things with the logical entity that describes the storage device, but
Mhm.
that comes with the abstraction that Ben was describing. Whether you like it or not, it is a thing that you have to look at it in a wholesome way.
Yeah.
It's probably better to hear from him as to how in this model how he would think some of these things will fit in.
Yeah, I also so let me start the thread in the Slack with Ben on pre-shared keys on the TLS,
Mhm.
how that fits in this model, and probably we'll have the offline discussion over there. And I share your concern with implementation. Like in our OPI SPDK bridge that we implemented, I'm not sure I understand yet how these objects map to the SPDK RPCs commands. So I maybe need to think a little bit more or ask Ben to advise us how this is going to work.
Makes sense.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep, and Boris Ben did state in his message that he'll respond on Slack, but he couldn't join today. Okay, any other comments that anybody else has related to this? All right. Any other topics we need to cover today? I know we have a lot of different things going on. Is there any other topics that anybody wants to bring up for today? All right, well, we will give everybody time back for this week. Those were pretty much the topics that we had for this week to work through. Next week, there won't be a meeting. There's the SmartNIC Summit, so we won't be having a meeting next week. And we will resume on the 22nd, looks like. Yep, we'll resume on the 22nd. All right, everybody. Short meeting today, but have a good rest of your week, and we'll chat again on the 22nd.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, thank you.